The cold January air bit into my skin as I parked in front of the clinic. The sign outside read, Horizon Dental. But my focus wasn't on the bright lettering or the cheery smiles on the poster. My hands were clenched around my steering wheel, knuckles white, as the words on my wife's phone replayed in my mind. I hope it's from me, right? The message from Dentist John had sent a jolt through me, freezing time and snapping it in half. I shouldn't have looked at her phone, but it had buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs getting our son, Charlie, ready for bed. Out of reflex, or maybe because my instincts had been on edge for weeks, I glanced at the screen. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought I'd misread it. I even blinked a few times, trying to process the absurdity of it. My wife, Lisa, and I were expecting our second child, something we'd been excited about for months. So, when the words flashed across her screen, I felt the world tilt dangerously. I hope it's from me. The insinuation was clear. My stomach churned. Lisa came downstairs moments later, her smile soft and warm as always. She had no idea the tectonic plates beneath my life had shifted. I couldn't say anything right away. I couldn't even look at her. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as she snored gently beside me, oblivious to the war raging inside me. In those quiet hours, the questions grew louder. Who was this man? Why did he think this child could be his? And worse, was it his? I told myself I was jumping to conclusions. Lisa had been nothing but supportive, caring, and attentive, everything a partner should be. We'd built a life together, one filled with laughter, plans, and dreams for the future. But now, cracks had appeared in the foundation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark lay beneath. By morning, I'd resolved to find out the truth. But I had no idea how far this discovery would lead me, or what kind of man it would turn me into. The morning after seeing the text, I woke up with a heaviness that clung to me like a second skin. Lisa was already up, humming to herself in the kitchen as she prepared Charlie's breakfast. She moved with the grace and confidence of someone without a care in the world, and I hated how normal everything looked. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said with a bright smile as I walked in. "Want some eggs?" "Sure," I muttered, trying to match her tone. I kissed her on the cheek, but it felt mechanical, detached. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she was too busy wiping Charlie's face to care. I sat at the table, staring at my coffee, while Charlie babbled about his toy cars. Lisa slid a plate of eggs and toast in front of me, and I managed a thank you before taking a bite I couldn't taste. My mind was spinning. I needed to figure out who this Dentist John was and why he had the audacity to send her a message like that. "Everything okay?" Lisa asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "You seem quiet." "Yeah, just tired," I said, forcing a small smile. "Didn't sleep great." Her face softened with concern. "Maybe you're overworking yourself. You've been putting in a lot of late nights lately." I nodded, using the excuse as a shield. "Probably." Inside, though, I was boiling. How could she sit there, pretending everything was fine, while keeping secrets from me? Was this how it had always been? The doubts ate away at me as I finished breakfast in silence. Later that day, while Lisa took Charlie to the park, I stayed behind under the pretense of cleaning out the garage. Instead, I went to work. I grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter and opened her messages. My hands shook as I scrolled, but the messages with John were gone. Nothing suspicious remained, no inappropriate texts, no deleted conversation logs that I could find. She'd been careful. Too careful. I was about to give up when I remembered her email account. Lisa wasn't particularly tech-savvy, and I knew she used the same password for everything. It was worth a shot. I opened her laptop and typed in her login. It worked. At first, her inbox looked mundane: online shopping receipts, newsletters, the occasional work email. But when I searched for John, I found it. A string of messages exchanged over the last few months, each one more intimate than the last. My stomach turned as I read them. One email stood out, dated 2 weeks ago. "I can't stop thinking about you. I know we said we'd keep this simple, but it's hard. Every time I see you, I want more. I want what we had before. Tell me you feel the same. John. The knot in my chest tightened. Before? Had they been together before Lisa and I? Was this some rekindled affair? Or worse, had it never stopped? I closed the laptop and paced the garage, my breathing uneven. My mind flashed back to the early days of our relationship. Lisa and I had met through mutual friends, and it had been instant chemistry. She was charming, funny, and warm, everything I thought I'd ever wanted. But now I couldn't help wondering, had there been red flags I'd ignored? Lies I'd brushed aside because I trusted her? I felt like a fool. Worse, I felt like a man who'd been betrayed not once, but twice. Because as much as I wanted to think of Lisa as the love of my life, I couldn't forget the woman who had come before her, my first wife, Emily. And the devastation she left in her wake. I thought I'd learned my lesson back then. I thought I'd built something stronger, something indestructible with Lisa. But now the cracks were there, and I was powerless to stop them from spreading. As I stood in the dim garage, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, I made a decision. This time, I wouldn't let it break me. This time, I would fight back. They wouldn't see me coming. The betrayal felt all too familiar, like déjà vu wrapped in razor wire. As I stood in the garage, surrounded by boxes of old tools and forgotten keepsakes, my mind pulled me back to the last time I had felt this hollow. Her name was Emily, my first wife. We had met in college, two bright-eyed kids with big dreams. She was my everything. I thought we'd be one of those couples that grew old together, who laughed about the small fights and celebrated every milestone. For a while, it felt like a fairy tale. Until it wasn't. I'd been working long hours at the time, trying to build a career in real estate, while Emily pursued her dreams of becoming an artist. I encouraged her to take her time, to pour herself into her work while I kept the lights on. I didn't mind the late nights or the stress of paying the bills. I believed in her. And I believed in us. But Emily didn't believe in me. It started with little things. She became distant, her laughter quieter, her gaze elsewhere when I spoke. She started spending more time at her studio, always with some excuse about needing inspiration. I told myself it was normal, art required solitude, and she'd come back to me when she was ready. The truth hit me on a Tuesday evening. I came home early, excited to surprise her with takeout from her favorite Thai place. The house was silent when I walked in, but her purse was by the door, so I knew she was home. I called out to her, but there was no response. Something felt off. My stomach churned as I climbed the stairs. Our bedroom door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I saw them. Emily and a man I didn't recognize tangled in our sheets, oblivious to my presence. The sound of the takeout bag hitting the floor startled them. Emily's eyes went wide as she scrambled to cover herself, stammering excuses that I couldn't even process. The man, a nameless, faceless stranger in my memory, grabbed his clothes and fled without a word. I wanted to scream, to rage, to destroy something. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway, my chest hollow as Emily begged me to talk about this. Talk? There was nothing to say. She had burned down our marriage, and all I could do was stand in the ashes. The divorce was swift and brutal. Emily fought for everything, half my income, the house, even our dog. She won, of course. The court had no reason to side with me. I hadn't caught her again after that night, and she claimed it was a one-time mistake. By the time the ink dried on the papers, she'd taken everything. I left that courtroom a broken man, vowing never to let someone gut me like that again. For years I avoided relationships, throwing myself into work and building a life that no one could take from me. I swore I'd never be vulnerable again. Then I met Lisa. She was different, or so I thought. She brought light back into my life, slowly chipping away at the walls I'd built. When we married, I believed I'd learned from my past. I was cautious, deliberate, determined to be a better husband. And when we had Charlie, I thought I'd finally found my second chance at happiness. But now, here I was again, staring down the barrel of betrayal. The thought of confronting Lisa filled me with dread. If she was anything like Emily, she'd deny everything, twist the truth until I questioned my own sanity. I couldn't let that happen, not again. This time, I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence. Only then could I confront her, dismantling whatever lies she thought she could hide behind. I pulled myself out of the spiral of memory and focused on the task at hand. I started with Lisa's schedule, tracing her movements over the last few months. She worked part-time as a dental hygienist at a clinic downtown, which must have been where she met this John. I called the clinic anonymously, asking for the names of the dentists on staff. When the receptionist rattled off the list, Dr. John Stevens was among them. Perfect. I hung up and got to work, researching everything I could about him. Social media, public records, even reviews from patients. I pieced together a picture of the man who had dared to worm his way into my life. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with a clean-cut appearance and an easy smile. The kind of man who seemed harmless, but wasn't. I hated him already. That night, as Lisa slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I didn't know if I could trust her, but I knew one thing for certain. If Lisa had betrayed me, if she had allowed this man into the life we'd built, I wouldn't just walk away quietly like I had with Emily. This time, I'd make sure they both paid for it. The morning after my discovery, I felt like I was moving through a fog. Lisa acted as though nothing was wrong, her usual cheery self as she made pancakes for Charlie and hummed along to some pop song on the radio. I studied her as I sipped my coffee, trying to see through the facade. Was it all an act? Was she really capable of living a double life while keeping this image of a devoted wife and mother? I had to remind myself not to tip my hand too soon. If I confronted her now, she'd spin a story, play the victim, and try to convince me I was imagining things. No, this time I had to be smart. Calculated. After breakfast, Lisa kissed me on the cheek and took Charlie to the park again, leaving me with a few precious hours to put my plan into motion. First, I needed a way to track her movements without her knowing. I ordered a GPS tracker online, small enough to fit discreetly in her car. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. I wanted the truth, and I was willing to pay for it. Next, I set up a few discreet cameras around the house. I told myself it was for home security, but the real purpose was clear. If she brought anyone here, if she brought him here, I'd have undeniable proof. The thought of another man stepping foot in my home, the home I'd built for my family, made my blood boil. But the cameras would catch them if she was bold enough to try. Finally, I created a new email account to track any communications she might be hiding. I forwarded her phone's cloud backups to the account, hoping to uncover deleted messages, calendar entries, or anything else she thought was erased. If there were secrets, I would find them. Once everything was in place, I sat in the quiet house, waiting. My hands shook with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. This wasn't who I wanted to be, spying on my wife, sneaking around behind her back. But what choice did I have? Trust had been shattered, and the only thing left was cold, hard evidence. A week passed. I kept up appearances, playing the role of the oblivious husband while carefully monitoring the data I was gathering. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Lisa's routine was predictable. Drop Charlie at preschool, work her shifts at the clinic, run errands, and come home. No strange phone calls, no unexplained absences. But then, on a Thursday afternoon, something changed. Lisa told me she had a team meeting at the clinic and would be home late. That wasn't unusual. Her job often scheduled after-hours training sessions. But when I checked the GPS tracker later that evening, her car wasn't at the clinic. It was parked in front of a hotel downtown. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. The digital map showed her car, stationary, outside the Wyndham Plaza. My fingers hovered over my phone as I debated whether to call her. But what would I say? If I confronted her without proof, she'd have an excuse ready. I needed to know what she was doing there, and who she was with. I got into my car and drove to the hotel, my heart pounding the entire way. As I pulled into the lot, I scanned the vehicles, looking for Lisa's silver sedan. I spotted it near the entrance, parked neatly in one of the guest spaces. My hands tightened on the wheel as I debated my next move. Should I go inside? Demand answers? Or wait and see who she was meeting? In the end, I decided to wait. Parking in a spot with a clear view of the entrance, I turned off the engine and settled in. Minutes felt like hours as I watched people come and go. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more damning than the last. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw her. Lisa stepped out of the hotel, her expression relaxed, a small smile playing on her lips. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man, him. Dr. John Stevens. They paused near her car, and for a moment, I thought she might leave. But then he leaned in, saying something that made her laugh. She touched his arm lightly, the gesture intimate enough to make my stomach churn. Then, without warning, he kissed her. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Watching them felt like being stabbed in slow motion, each second dragging out the pain. I wanted to get out of the car, to confront them right there in the parking lot. But I stayed frozen, my mind a swirling storm of anger, humiliation, and cold, calculated fury. When the kiss ended, Lisa got into her car and drove away, leaving John behind. I stayed parked for a few minutes, my breathing ragged as I tried to process what I'd just seen. I wasn't imagining things. It wasn't paranoia. She was cheating on me, again. But this time, I wouldn't be the one left broken. This time, I would be the one to break them. That night, as Lisa came home and kissed me goodnight like nothing had happened, I smiled back at her, playing my role to perfection. The first step of my plan was complete. I had my proof. Now, it was time to make her regret ever thinking she could betray me. The days after I saw Lisa with John felt surreal. On the surface, nothing changed. I played the role of the doting husband, attentive father, and oblivious fool. Lisa played her part, too, smiling, laughing, and carrying on as if she weren't ripping our family apart behind the scenes. But beneath my calm exterior, I was a storm brewing. Every interaction with her felt like a test of my patience. Every kiss goodnight, every shared joke over dinner, it was all poison now, laced with the knowledge of her betrayal. I forced myself to endure it, to let her believe she'd gotten away with it. The longer she thought I didn't know, the more reckless she'd become. The next phase of my plan required precision. I couldn't just confront her outright. That would give her the chance to manipulate the narrative. No, I needed to dismantle her lies piece by piece, exposing the truth in a way she couldn't escape. I started with Dentist John. Using the information I'd gathered, I learned that he was unmarried and had a spotless reputation in his professional life. A charming, successful man, exactly the kind of person Lisa might gravitate toward. But everyone has secrets, and I was determined to find his. Through a friend who worked in IT, I gained access to his social media accounts. What I found there wasn't incriminating, but it painted a picture of his life outside the clinic, late nights out with friends, an expensive taste in cars, and a carefully curated image of perfection. But it was his email, linked to one of his accounts, that became my goldmine. It wasn't long before I uncovered what I was looking for, emails between John and Lisa, detailing their affair in painful, vivid detail. They'd been meeting for months, stealing moments during lunch breaks, after her shifts, and, most recently, at that hotel. The emails were sickening, filled with promises, confessions, and plans for a future that didn't include me. One message, in particular, stood out. "I can't wait for us to finally be together without hiding. You deserve so much more than this double life. Once the baby is born, everything will fall into place." I stared at the screen, the meaning behind the words hitting me like a freight train. Once the baby is born. Was he implying what I thought he was? That the baby might be his? My mind reeled. This wasn't just infidelity. This was an attempt to rewrite my life, to steal the future I had built. The anger boiling inside me became a tool. I channeled it into action, crafting a strategy that would leave no doubt about what Lisa and John had done. I created a file, one filled with the emails, the GPS tracker logs, the security footage from the house, and even screenshots of their public photos together. Every piece of evidence was meticulously organized, ready for the day I would expose their lies. Then I set my sights on Lisa. I began watching her more closely, noting the little inconsistencies in her behavior. She was careful, always smiling, always doting, but I started to notice cracks. The way her eyes darted away when I asked about her day. The sudden need to run errands, that took longer than they should. The subtle way she checked her phone, glancing at messages she thought I didn't notice. I pretended not to see. I pretended not to care. But the moment of reckoning was coming. One evening, Lisa suggested we invite her parents over for dinner. It was a casual suggestion, but it gave me an idea. A family dinner would be the perfect setting for the confrontation I'd been planning. With an audience of people she cared about, she wouldn't be able to spin the story or deflect the blame. She would be exposed, completely and irrevocably. Sounds like a great idea, I said with a smile. Let's make it special. Lisa beamed, oblivious to the trap I was setting. I'll handle the food, she said. It'll be nice to have everyone together. As she busied herself with preparations, I finalized the details. I uploaded the file of evidence to a private drive, ready to share when the time was right. I rehearsed what I would say, ensuring there would be no room for doubt or argument. And I prepared myself for the fallout. On the night of the dinner, the house was filled with laughter and the scent of roasted chicken. Lisa's parents arrived first, followed by her sister and brother-in-law. Charlie was in his room, playing with his toys, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Lisa was the perfect hostess, serving drinks and chatting effortlessly with her family. She was radiant, the picture of a devoted wife and mother. But I saw through it now, all of it. The lies, the betrayal, the mask she wore so well. When dinner was served, I waited for the right moment. As the conversation turned to light-hearted stories about the past, I cleared my throat. Everyone, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'd like to say something. The table fell silent as all eyes turned to me. Lisa froze, her smile faltering. This family means everything to me, I began, my gaze sweeping across the room. And because of that, I believe in honesty. I believe in trust. Lisa's eyes darted to me, her expression wary. She knew something was coming, but she had no idea how much I knew. But trust isn't always reciprocated, I continued, my voice hardening. And sometimes, the people we think we can count on the most are the ones who betray us. The tension in the room was palpable. Lisa's father frowned, glancing between us. Ryan, what are you talking about? I took out my phone and set it on the table, the file of evidence queued up. Lisa, I said, locking eyes with her. Why don't you explain who Dentist John is? Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I didn't wait for her to recover. I tapped the screen, projecting the first piece of evidence, the email thread between her and John. Gasps filled the room as the words appeared, stark and undeniable. Is this some kind of joke? Her mother whispered, looking horrified. No, I said, my voice like ice. It's the truth. The truth she's been hiding while pretending to be the perfect wife. Lisa's tears started falling, but I didn't stop. I went through the evidence one by one, the emails, the GPS logs, the footage of her leaving the hotel with John. Every piece was a dagger, cutting through the lies she had built around herself. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Lisa was sobbing, her face buried in her hands. Her parents looked devastated, her sister stunned into silence. This is who she is, I said, my voice steady. This is what she's done. Lisa finally looked up, her face a mess of tears and desperation. Ryan, please. No, I snapped, cutting her off. You made your choice, Lisa. Now you'll live with the consequences. This was only the beginning. The silence after my final words was deafening. Lisa sat frozen, her face streaked with tears, as her family stared at her in disbelief. Her mother, Mary, was the first to speak, her voice shaking. Lisa, is this true? Did you do this to Ryan? Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came out. She glanced around the room, her desperation palpable. I didn't mean for it to happen, she choked out. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. I cut in, my voice sharp. You lied. You cheated. You brought another man into our life, into my life, and now you want to twist it into something it isn't? Lisa's father, George, slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. How could you do this, Lisa? To your husband? To your child? His voice was thick with anger and disappointment. Dad, She tried, but he held up a hand to silence her. No excuses, he snapped. Ryan's been nothing but good to you. To all of us. And this is how you repay him? Her sister, Grace, shook her head, disgust etched across her face. You've always been selfish, Lisa, but this? This is unforgivable. Lisa's sobs grew louder as the walls of her carefully constructed world began to crumble. Her family's outrage burned away any chance she had of spinning the story. I leaned forward, my voice low and cold. You didn't just betray me, Lisa. You betrayed Charlie. You betrayed the family we built together. She shook her head vehemently, her words tumbling out between sobs. Ryan, I was lonely. You were always working, always focused on everything except us. I didn't know how to tell you how I felt. I made a mistake, but I... Stop, I said, cutting her off. You don't get to play the victim. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. Instead, you chose to sneak around behind my back. And for what? For him? Lisa buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. Her mother moved to comfort her, but George held her back, his expression hardened. I think you've done enough damage, Lisa, he said coldly. After what felt like hours, Lisa's family began to leave, their disappointment and anger hanging heavy in the air. Grace stopped at the door, turning back to me. Ryan, if there's anything we can do to help, let us know. I nodded, my voice flat. Thank you. As the door closed behind them, the silence in the house felt suffocating. Lisa and I were alone now, and the weight of everything that had happened hung between us like a storm cloud. She looked at me, her tear-streaked face full of desperation. Ryan, please. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. Think about Charlie, think about the baby. At the mention of the baby, my blood ran cold. Whose baby is it, Lisa? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Her eyes widened, and she stammered. It's yours, Ryan. Of course, it's yours. Then why did John think it might be his? I demanded, my fists clenched. I saw the message, Lisa. I hope it's from me. You let him think there was a possibility. Why? She shook her head frantically. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I never told him that. He's lying. Don't lie to me, I growled, stepping closer. I've seen the emails. I've seen the messages. You've been lying to me for months. Why should I believe you now? She broke down completely, falling to her knees. Ryan, I swear, it's your baby. I made a mistake, but I never stopped loving you. Please, you have to believe me. I stared down at her, the woman I'd once loved more than anything in the world. Now, she was a stranger, someone who had taken everything I'd given her and destroyed it. I'll get a paternity test, I said coldly. If the baby is mine, I'll be there for him or her. But you? We're done. Lisa's sobs grew louder, but I turned away, heading upstairs to Charlie's room. I needed to see him, to remind myself of the one good thing to come out of this mess. As I watched him sleep, his small chest rising and falling with each breath, I felt a surge of determination. Lisa might have betrayed me, but I wouldn't let her destroy Charlie's life. He deserved better, and I would make sure he got it. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Angela. I laid everything out, the affair, the emails, the evidence. She listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with every detail. You have a strong case for divorce, she said finally. And if the paternity test confirms the baby isn't yours, it'll only strengthen your position. And custody? I asked, my jaw tight. With what you've shown me, we can argue that Lisa's actions demonstrate poor judgment and instability, Angela said. It'll take some work, but we can fight for primary custody of Charlie. Do it, I said without hesitation. Angela nodded. I'll file the paperwork. But Ryan, this is going to get ugly. Be prepared for that. I left her office with a mixture of relief and dread. The path ahead was clear, but it wasn't going to be easy. Lisa had taken everything from me, but now it was my turn to take control. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protecting my son and rebuilding a life free of lies. And no matter what it took, I wouldn't stop until I had both. The following weeks were a whirlwind of quiet chaos. Lisa stayed in the house, though we barely spoke. She tried to reach out a few times, but I shut her down every time. There was nothing left to say. I was focused on the divorce proceedings and the custody battle ahead. Angela worked quickly, filing the necessary paperwork and securing a court date. But it wasn't just the legal process that consumed me, it was the storm brewing beneath the surface. Lisa still didn't know the extent of the evidence I had or how much damage it could do to her. That uncertainty gave me leverage, and I planned to use it. One evening, I sat in my office reviewing the file of evidence when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I don't want trouble, but we need to talk. John. I stared at the screen, my anger bubbling to the surface. John. The man who thought he could waltz into my life and tear it apart. For a moment, I considered ignoring him. But then, a dark part of me saw an opportunity. I replied, Name the time and place. The next afternoon, I found myself sitting in a corner booth at a dimly lit diner. John walked in, looking every bit as nervous as I hoped he'd be. He spotted me, hesitated for a moment, then made his way over. Ryan, he said, offering a small, strained smile. Thanks for meeting me. I didn't shake his hand or return the smile. Let's get this over with. He nodded and slid into the seat across from me. For a moment neither of us spoke. He shifted uncomfortably under my glare before finally breaking the silence. Look, I know I've screwed up, he began. I didn't mean to. Well, I didn't know how bad things were between you and Lisa. You didn't know? I cut in, my voice cold. You mean you didn't care? His face reddened, and he looked down at the table. I cared. I just believed what she told me. She said your marriage was already falling apart. That she felt trapped. She made it sound like you didn't love her anymore. My jaw tightened. And that gave you the green light to sleep with another man's wife? To jeopardize my family? My son? John's head snapped up at the mention of Charlie. I never wanted to hurt your son. I didn't even know she had a kid until later. Of course you didn't, I sneered. Because you didn't bother to ask, did you? He fell silent, his guilt written all over his face. I leaned forward, my voice low and dangerous. You've already done enough damage, John. But if you think for 1 second I'll let you or Lisa take anything else from me, you're dead wrong. His eyes widened. I don't want to take anything from you, Ryan. I ended things with her. I realized it was a mistake. That's why I'm here. I want to make things right. I let out a bitter laugh. You can't make things right. You destroyed everything, and now you want to pretend you're the good guy. I'm not pretending, he said earnestly. I don't want this to get worse. I narrowed my eyes. It's already worse, John. But you're going to help me fix it. He looked at me warily. How? You're going to testify, I said. In court. About everything. The affair, the lies, the manipulation, everything. He paled. Ryan, I don't know if... You don't have a choice, I interrupted. Because if you don't, I'll make sure every detail of what you did gets out. Your patients, your colleagues, your precious reputation, they'll all know exactly what kind of man you are. He swallowed hard, his hands fidgeting on the table. Fine, he muttered. I'll do it. Good, I said, standing up. And one more thing, stay away from my family. If I see you near Lisa or Charlie again, I won't be so civil. John nodded, his face pale as I walked out of the diner. That night, as I sat in the quiet house, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. John's cooperation would strengthen my case, giving me even more leverage against Lisa. But the victory felt hollow. No matter how much I exposed, I couldn't erase the damage they'd done. Lisa tried to talk to me again that evening, but I shut her down. Ryan, please, she said, her voice trembling. We need to figure out how to move forward. For Charlie's sake. We are moving forward, I said coldly. You'll get your chance to speak, in court. Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. The time for sympathy was long gone. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, court filings, and preparation. The paternity test confirmed that the baby was mine, which brought a strange mix of relief and anger. Lisa's betrayal still burned, but at least I wouldn't lose my connection to my unborn child. When the court date arrived, I was ready. Armed with Angela, the evidence, and even John's reluctant testimony, I walked into the courtroom determined to take back control of my life. Lisa sat across from me, her face pale but defiant. I could see the cracks in her composure, the guilt and fear she tried to hide. She had no idea what was coming. As the proceedings began, I kept my focus on one thing, ensuring that Charlie, and the child Lisa carried, would grow up in a stable, honest home. No matter the cost, I would protect them. And I would make Lisa regret the day she thought she could betray me. The courtroom was sterile and cold, a stage where the weight of my marriage, and its destruction, would be laid bare for everyone to see. Lisa sat across from me, flanked by her lawyer, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. She refused to meet my eyes. Angela, my lawyer, was calm and collected, her presence a quiet source of reassurance. I had come prepared, emotionally, legally, and strategically. I wasn't here to humiliate Lisa, but I wouldn't let her rewrite the narrative of what she had done. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, called the court to order. We're here today to address matters of divorce and custody between Ryan Garrett and Lisa Garrett. Let's begin. Angela began laying out our case methodically, presenting the evidence I had spent weeks collecting. She started with the emails, damning and explicit messages between Lisa and John, discussing their affair and their plans to be together. Your Honor, Angela said, her tone firm but respectful. This evidence demonstrates not only a pattern of infidelity, but also a blatant disregard for the sanctity of this marriage and the well-being of the children involved. Lisa's lawyer tried to object, claiming the emails were taken out of context. But Angela didn't miss a beat. Context? She echoed, arching an eyebrow. What context could justify these words, Your Honor? She held up a copy of an email where John had written, I can't wait for us to be together without hiding. The judge frowned, her expression grim. Proceed. Next came the security footage and GPS logs, evidence that confirmed Lisa had met John multiple times behind my back. Angela played the footage of Lisa leaving the hotel with John, the timestamp clear as day. I stole a glance at Lisa. Her face was pale, her hands clenched into fists on her lap. She looked as though she wanted to sink through the floor. The final blow came when Angela called John to the stand. He looked nervous as he approached, glancing briefly at me before taking his seat. Mr. Stevens, Angela began. You've stated that you had a romantic relationship with Mrs. Garrett. Is that correct? John swallowed hard. Yes. And this relationship began while she was still married to Mr. Garrett? Yes, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Angela's questions were sharp, precise, leaving no room for ambiguity. By the time she finished, John had confirmed the affair in explicit detail, leaving no doubt about Lisa's betrayal. When Lisa's lawyer cross-examined him, trying to paint him as an unreliable witness, John's answers remained consistent. The damage was done. After hours of testimony and evidence, the judge called a recess. I stepped out into the hallway, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, relief, and exhaustion. Lisa caught up with me as I stood by the water fountain. Her face was streaked with tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Ryan," she said, her hands wringing together. "Please don't do this. Don't take Charlie from me." I turned to her, my voice cold. "You did this, Lisa. Not me. I know I made mistakes," she pleaded, her tears falling freely now. "But I'm still his mother. He needs me. He needs stability," I said, my voice hard. "And you've proven you can't provide that." She reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "Ryan, I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't take my children." I stared at her, the woman I had once loved, and felt nothing but the weight of her betrayal. "You already lost me, Lisa," I said quietly. "Don't make this about you. This is about what's best for Charlie." Her sobs echoed down the hallway as I walked away. When the judge delivered her ruling later that afternoon, the decision was clear. I was awarded primary custody of Charlie, with Lisa granted supervised visitation until the court could determine her fitness as a parent. The judge cited her infidelity and poor judgment as factors that demonstrated a lack of stability. As for the unborn child, the court deferred judgment until after the birth, though the paternity test results worked in my favor. Lisa would have to prove her ability to co-parent before gaining any meaningful custody rights. The gavel struck, and it was over. Lisa collapsed into her chair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I watched her for a moment, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. She had destroyed our life together, but this wasn't a victory. There were no winners here, only survivors. Later that night, after I put Charlie to bed, I sat alone in the quiet house. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, but the major battles had been fought and won. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but all I felt was exhaustion. The life I had built was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of hope. I would rebuild, for Charlie, for my unborn child, and for myself. Lisa had taken so much from me, but she hadn't taken everything. I still had my children, my integrity, and my determination to move forward. And that was enough. For now. The days after the court ruling were eerily quiet. Lisa had moved out of the house, taking only a few suitcases and leaving behind an awkward silence that echoed through the halls. Charlie didn't seem to fully understand what was happening. He asked about his mom often, his little voice full of confusion. I tried to shield him from the worst of it, but explaining why his mom didn't live with us anymore without revealing the truth was a delicate balancing act. "Mommy loves you," I told him one night as I tucked him in. "She just needs some time to figure things out. But I'm here, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, clutching his stuffed bear tightly. "Can Mommy still visit me?" "She will," I assured him, even though the idea of seeing Lisa still made my stomach turn. "But for now, let's focus on you and me, okay? We're a team." He smiled sleepily, and I kissed his forehead, my heart breaking for him. As I tried to build a new routine, Lisa's presence lingered in the background. She texted me daily, alternating between pleas for forgiveness and bitter accusations about the court's decision. I ignored most of them. There was no point in engaging, not when her words were so clearly fueled by desperation. One day, she showed up at the house unannounced, her face pale and drawn. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Ryan," she began, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you." "Make it quick," I said, keeping my tone cold. She hesitated, glancing at the empty space behind me. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies, the affair, all of it." I folded my arms unmoved. "You've said that before, Lisa. Forgiveness doesn't erase what you did." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know. I don't know how to move on from this. I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it," I said bluntly. You made your choice, and now you're living with the consequences. She nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I just want to be part of Charlie's life. That's all I'm asking for. That's up to you, I replied. You want to prove you're a good mom? Then show it. Be consistent. Be reliable. But don't expect me to make it easy for you. Her tears fell freely now, but I didn't feel sympathy. She had created this mess, and now she had to live with it. After a moment, she turned and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her drive away, a strange mixture of relief and sadness washing over me. While Lisa floundered, I focused on Charlie. We fell into a new rhythm: school drop-offs, bedtime stories, weekend adventures to the park or zoo. He was my anchor, the one thing that kept me grounded in the chaos. But even as I rebuilt my life, the scars of Lisa's betrayal lingered. Trust felt like a fragile thing now, something I wasn't sure I'd ever fully give to anyone again. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Angela, my lawyer. Ryan, I've got some news, she said. What is it? Lisa's lawyer reached out. She wants to settle the divorce amicably. I raised an eyebrow. Amicably? After everything she's done? She doesn't have much of a choice, Angela said. The evidence we presented in court made it clear she wouldn't win a fight. She's willing to waive her claim to spousal support if you agree to a fair custody arrangement once the baby is born. I thought about it for a moment. The idea of dragging this out any longer was exhausting. If settling meant I could finally close this chapter, then it was worth considering. Let's do it, I said. I just want this over with. The settlement was finalized quickly. Lisa signed over primary custody of Charlie, and we agreed to revisit custody arrangements for the baby after its birth. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town and started attending therapy, something she said was part of her effort to make things right. I didn't care about her efforts. My focus was on moving forward, for myself and for Charlie. One night, as I was tucking Charlie into bed, he asked me something that stopped me cold. Daddy, he said softly, do you still love Mommy? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. How could I explain to a 5-year-old the complexities of love, betrayal, and loss? I'll always care about Mommy, I said carefully. She's your mom, and she'll always be a part of our lives. But sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes that are hard to fix. Did she make a big mistake? He asked, his wide eyes filled with innocence. She did, I admitted. But we're going to be okay, buddy. I promise. He nodded, satisfied with my answer, and drifted off to sleep. As I sat beside him, watching him breathe, I felt a flicker of hope. Lisa's betrayal had shattered me, but it hadn't broken me. I still had Charlie. I still had a future. And that was enough to keep going. Months passed, and the chaos that once consumed my life began to settle. Lisa and I kept communication strictly about Charlie and the impending birth of the baby. Her texts were cordial, her visits brief, and though the tension between us was undeniable, I could feel her trying to rebuild her image, not for me, but for Charlie. Despite everything, I stayed firm. The damage was done, and there was no path back. My focus was on creating a stable, loving home for my son and preparing for the arrival of my second child. The day the baby was born was surreal. Lisa texted me from the hospital when she went into labor, asking if I would be there. For a moment I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to set foot in that room, to pretend we were anything other than broken. But the baby didn't deserve to be punished for our mistakes. So I went. When I walked into the hospital room, Lisa looked up at me, her expression a mix of relief and uncertainty. She was pale and exhausted, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes that I deliberately ignored. It's a boy, she said softly, her voice trembling. I nodded, standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed. How is he? Perfect, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. A nurse brought the baby over, swaddled in a tiny blue blanket. My heart clenched as I held him for the first time, his tiny fingers curling around mine. For a moment, Everything else faded away, the betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak. All I felt was love. What's his name? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. I was hoping we could decide together, Lisa said. I looked at her, surprised. Despite everything, this gesture felt genuine, like a small attempt to bridge the chasm between us. Liam, I said after a moment. I've always liked that name. She smiled weakly. Liam it is. The weeks that followed were challenging but manageable. Liam stayed with Lisa initially, as she recovered and adjusted to life with a newborn. I visited often, not for her sake, but for his. Each time I walked into her apartment, I kept my guard up, refusing to let her proximity blur the lines I had drawn. Lisa made an effort to prove she was taking motherhood seriously. She attended therapy, kept her home spotless, and stayed consistent with her visits to Charlie. Slowly, I began to believe that she was changing, not for me, but for herself and the children. But forgiveness was another matter. One afternoon, as we met at a park to let Charlie play and for me to see Liam, Lisa turned to me with a tentative expression. Ryan, she began, her voice soft. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I sighed, watching Charlie chase after a soccer ball. Forgiveness isn't something I can give you right now, Lisa. Maybe not ever. Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded. I understand. I'm not saying this to hurt you, I continued, keeping my tone steady. It's just, what you did, it broke something in me. Something I don't know if I can fix. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. I just want to do better for them. For Charlie and Liam. Then do that, I said simply. Be a good mom. That's all that matters now. As the months turned into a year, life began to take shape again. Charlie adapted to his new routine, and Liam grew into a happy, curious baby. Lisa and I remained distant but civil, working together for the sake of the boys. One day, as I dropped Charlie off at Lisa's apartment, he hugged me tightly and whispered, I love you, Daddy. I love you too, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. As I walked back to my car, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The pain of Lisa's betrayal would never fully leave me, but I realized something important that day. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I had survived. I had rebuilt. And I was finally free. A year later, on a crisp fall morning, I sat in the park with Charlie and Liam, watching the two of them laugh together as leaves crunched under their feet. They were my world now, my reason for moving forward. Lisa arrived shortly after, her face softened by time and effort. She waved to the boys, who ran to her with excited shouts. As I watched her scoop Liam into her arms, I felt a strange sense of peace. The wounds she had caused were still there, but they no longer controlled me. I had rebuilt my life brick by brick, piece by piece. And in the quiet moments like this, I finally felt whole again. The past was a lesson, not a life sentence. And for the first time in years, I looked toward the future with hope. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.